My son looked me dead in the eye during his engagement party and said, "Mom, I love you, but let's be real, you only stayed married to Dad for the money. You're a gold digger. You always have been." The room went completely silent. Everyone stared at me, waiting to see how I'd react. And you know what I did? I smiled, excused myself, went home, and started calculating exactly how much his entire childhood had cost me. By the end of the night, I had a spreadsheet with a grand total that made my blood run cold. But what I did next wasn't what you'd expect. My name is Patricia Johnson, and this is the story of how I almost destroyed my relationship with my son and how I chose to save it instead. I need to take you back to understand where this came from. 28 years ago, I married David. He was charming, ambitious, and came from money. Real money. His family owned commercial real estate across 3 states. My family, we were middle class. My father was a postal worker. My mother was a nurse. We were comfortable, but not wealthy. That detail would haunt me for the next 3 decades. David and I were young and in love. We got married at 24. By 26, we had our son, Marcus. I was thrilled. I wanted to be the best mother in the world. I quit my job as an accountant to stay home with him, not because David asked me to, but because that's what I wanted. I wanted to be present for his first words, his first steps, everything. For the first few years, everything was perfect. David's career was taking off. And yes, we had money. But I was the one making the sacrifices. I was the one waking up at 3 a.m. with a teething baby. I was the one missing professional conferences, turning down promotions, putting my career on hold indefinitely. When Marcus was 7, David's family business started having problems. David worked constantly, trying to save it. I became not just a mother, but a single parent who happened to be married. I managed the household, managed Marcus's schedule, handled his education, dealt with his emotional needs. I did everything, but David's family never saw it that way. His mother, Diane, was particularly dismissive. When I'd mentioned something I'd done, organizing Marcus's school, helping with his science project, volunteering at his school, Diane would make comments like, "Well, that's what you're supposed to do, Patricia. You don't deserve a medal for being a mother." When David's business finally stabilized, I asked about returning to work part-time, maybe consulting, building my career back up. David was resistant. "We don't need the money, and Marcus needs you home," he said. I accepted it. I thought I was making the right choice for my family. But the resentment started building, brick by brick. David never acknowledged the career I'd sacrificed. He never said thank you for the hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential earnings I'd given up. He never seemed to understand that while he was building his business, I was building a human being, and that was equally valuable, if not more so. When Marcus was a teenager, I noticed David had started treating money like a weapon. If I wanted something, a new dress, a weekend away, he'd question it. "Do you really need that? We should be careful." But his spending was never questioned. Vacations, golf clubs, a new car, those were investments in his well-being. I started feeling like I was married to a bank account instead of a person. Then, when Marcus turned 18, everything changed. David left me for his 25-year-old administrative assistant. He moved out, filed for divorce, and suddenly, I was facing a future I hadn't prepared for. I'd been out of the workforce for 12 years. My skills were rusty. My resume was a gap. The divorce settlement was fair, legally speaking. David paid spousal support and child support until Marcus turned 21. But it wasn't generous. It was the bare minimum the courts required. Despite everything I'd sacrificed, despite the fact that I'd enabled David's business success by managing our household and raising our son alone, I walked away with far less than I should have. I went back to work as an accountant. I was 52 years old, trying to rebuild a career I'd abandoned in my prime. It was humbling and exhausting and infuriating all at once, but I did it. I clawed my way back up. I was determined to show my son that our family's wealth, even though I no longer had access to it, hadn't made life easy. It had just made life complicated. Marcus grew up knowing his father was wealthy. David saw him on weekends and bought his affection with things: a car at 16, a new laptop, money for college. Marcus went to an expensive private university. He never had to work a day in his life. Meanwhile, I was working 60-hour weeks trying to rebuild my retirement savings, which had been decimated by the divorce. I was paying my own way through life. I wasn't asking Marcus for anything because I believed in being independent, but I also wanted him to understand where I came from, who I was before I became a mother, what I'd given up. I told him stories about my career before he was born. I shared with him the difficult years after the divorce. I tried to instill in him a sense of gratitude and understanding about privilege and sacrifice. I thought he got it, but apparently he didn't. Marcus graduated college and got a job at his father's company. Shocked? Me too. I thought maybe he'd want to carve his own path, but no. He took the easy route: nepotism, connections, family money. Within 5 years, he was making 6 figures. He lived in a luxury apartment that his father helped him buy a down payment for. He was engaged to Amber, a woman from another wealthy family. They were planning their engagement party, a catered affair at an upscale venue, and Marcus asked me to come. I was excited. I was proud of my son. Even if I was concerned about how easily he'd let privilege shape his life without any real struggle. That's when it happened. We were standing near the bar, making small talk with some of Amber's relatives. Someone asked about my work. I mentioned that I was in my 24th year at my accounting firm and had recently been promoted to senior partner. Amber's aunt looked impressed. "That's wonderful! You must be so proud to have built that career." "I am," I said. "It took time to rebuild after I left the workforce to raise Marcus." "But Mom makes it sound so noble," Marcus interrupted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But let's be real. You're only successful because Dad's alimony and child support paid for everything while you were figuring out your life. You gotta have it both ways. You stayed home with me when you wanted, and then Dad supported you when you decided to go back to work. You were basically a gold digger who happened to have a job." The room went silent. Amber looked mortified. Her aunt suddenly became very interested in her drink. I felt something inside me break. "Excuse me?" I said quietly. "I'm just saying, Mom. You act like you sacrificed so much, but you benefited financially from being married to Dad your entire life. You're not some self-made woman. You're someone who lived off a man's money and then acted victimized when he wanted to move on." I stood there, staring at my son, this man I'd raised, this person I'd stayed home with for 12 years, this child I'd sacrificed my career for, and I realized he didn't see me. He didn't see the sacrifice. He saw only the money he thought had been handed to me. I excused myself and left the party. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I opened a spreadsheet and I started calculating. I started with the basics. How much did it cost to raise Marcus from birth to age 18? Food. According to the USDA, the average cost of raising a child in the United States ranges from $200,000 to $400,000, depending on the region and specific circumstances. I was in the upper middle class range, so I calculated conservatively $250,000 for 18 years of food, clothing, and basic necessities. Housing. I calculated what portion of our mortgage, property taxes, utilities, and maintenance went toward Marcus's room and the common areas he used. Conservative estimate, $180,000. Education. Private school tuition from kindergarten through high school, plus tutoring, school supplies, college visits, $120,000. Health care. Pediatrician visits, braces, glasses, medications, vaccinations. The emergency room visit when he broke his arm, $35,000. Activities. Piano lessons, soccer camps, debate team travel, prom expenses, $40,000. Childcare before he started school, $45,000. Transportation, entertainment, holidays, $80,000. The grand total came to approximately $750,000. $750,000 that I had spent raising this child. But then I kept going. I calculated the cost of the career I'd given up. I was making $65,000 a year when I left the workforce. Over 12 years, that's 780,000 inches direct lost income. But careers compound. If I'd continued working, with promotions and raises, I'd probably be making more. And those 12 years of work experience would have put me in a different position when I returned. Conservative estimate of lost career advancement, another 500,000. I calculated the retirement savings I'd lost. Had I kept working and investing, my retirement would be significantly larger. Conservative estimate, 400,000. Health insurance I'd maintained on a part-time basis because David's wasn't available to me after the divorce. 25,000. The emotional labor, the sleepless nights, the worry, the stress, the anxiety about my future. By the time I was done, the spreadsheet showed nearly $2.5 million. $2.5 million. I stared at that number for a long time. I could see exactly how I'd calculated it, how each line item represented a specific sacrifice. And I felt something rising inside me, not just anger, but the accumulation of decades of underappreciation finally boiling over. I drafted an email to Marcus with the spreadsheet attached. The subject line read, "Invoice for services rendered, your childhood." I wrote, "Dear Marcus, I've attached a detailed accounting of the cost of raising you from birth to age 18, including the career opportunities I sacrificed, the retirement savings I forgone, and the financial impact of my decision to prioritize your well-being over my professional advancement. The total comes to $2,487,340. I'm not asking you to pay it. I'm asking you to look at this number and understand what I gave up. I want you to see that your entire existence and upbringing was not something I did because I benefited financially. It was something I did despite the massive financial cost to myself. I did it because I love you. And the accusation that I'm a gold digger is not just insulting. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of who I am and what I've done." My finger hovered over the send button. I was going to do it. I was actually going to send this spreadsheet to my son, throw the numbers in his face, make him feel as small as he'd made me feel. And then I stopped. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for 20 minutes. What was I doing? I was about to weaponize my sacrifice. I was about to use a spreadsheet, a beautiful, detailed, thoroughly calculated spreadsheet as a tool to hurt my son and make him feel guilty. Yes, Marcus had been cruel and ungrateful. Yes, he'd made an assumption about me that was insulting and dismissive. Yes, he owed me an apology. But sending him that bill wouldn't get me an apology. It would just get me a son who felt attacked, manipulated, and shamed. And honestly, if I sent that bill, I'd become the gold digger he accused me of being, someone who measured love in dollars, who kept score of every sacrifice, who expected payment for having a child. That wasn't who I was. I realized that my real issue wasn't with Marcus, it was with David. Marcus had grown up in a world where everything had a price tag. His father had shown him that money was the primary way to show love. David had bought Marcus's affection, instead of earning it through presence and consistency. So, of course, Marcus saw the world through a financial lens. He'd been trained to. And while that was David's fault, punishing Marcus with a bill wouldn't fix it. It would just repeat the cycle. The next morning, I did something different. I called Marcus. "Hi, Mom," he answered cautiously. He knew he'd messed up. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not interrupt. Can you do that?" "Yeah, okay. I'm not angry about what you said yesterday, because you hurt my feelings, although you did. I'm upset because you fundamentally misunderstand who I am and what my choices have meant. So I want to tell you a story. Not a guilt trip, just a story." I told him everything. I told him about leaving my job. I told him why not as a burden on him, but as context. I told him about the years when I felt invisible, when my contributions to our family weren't valued. I told him about the divorce and how difficult it was to rebuild my career. But then I told him the important part. I don't regret any of it, Marcus, not one single day. Do you know why? Because you turned out to be a good person. You're kind, intelligent, creative. You care about people. You work hard at your job. You're going to be a good husband to Amber. All of that is because of the choices I made and the time I invested in you. It wasn't an investment I expected to be repaid. It was an investment in a human being I love. Mom, he started. I'm not done. What upset me yesterday isn't that you questioned my sacrifice. It's that you assumed the worst of my intentions. You assumed I married your father for money. You assumed that my choice to stay home was about financial security rather than love for you. And you made that assumption without ever asking me what my actual life was like, what my actual motivations were. You made it about money because that's what you see. But that's not all there is. Silence on the other end. I'm going to send you something, I continued. It's a spreadsheet. It has numbers in it. And yes, the numbers represent a lot of money. But I'm not sending it to make you feel guilty. I'm sending it so you understand the magnitude of what it means to be a parent. So you understand that someone choosing to raise you, to sacrifice for you, is one of the most valuable things a human being can do. And so you understand that when someone accuses your mother of being a gold digger, they're not just insulting her, they're dismissing the deepest, most meaningful work of her life. I sent the email with the spreadsheet. Then I asked Marcus if he'd come over to my house. He said yes. When Marcus arrived at my house, he looked devastated. He'd looked at the spreadsheet. He'd seen the numbers. And for the first time in his life, he was understanding what I'd actually sacrificed. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said. And he was crying. I didn't understand. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. And that's partly my fault. I think I've been afraid to tell you the hard parts of my story because I didn't want you to feel guilty. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me something. But in doing that, I never helped you understand the actual magnitude of sacrifice and love. That spreadsheet, 2.5 million? He looked at it again, printed out on my kitchen table. Mom, that's everything. It is, I said. But here's what I want you to understand, Marcus. I don't want that money from you. I'm not sending you an invoice. If I were, I would have. But sending you a bill would make me a transactional parent, and that's not what I am. What I want is for you to understand that your life has value. Your existence mattered enough to me that I sacrificed my career, my financial security, my future. And when you accuse me of being a gold digger, you're suggesting that the most important thing I've done raising you was actually about greed. Marcus broke down. We sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours. He asked me questions about my life, my choices, my struggles. Real questions. Questions that came from a place of genuine curiosity and concern, not judgment or defensiveness. He told me that he'd felt guilty growing up. He'd noticed that his father had money, but his parents were unhappy. He'd absorbed David's resentment of the sacrifices I'd made, and instead of recognizing those sacrifices as love, he'd internalized his father's perspective that I must have been motivated by financial security. Dad used to say things, Marcus said quietly. When he thought you weren't listening, he'd say that you'd chosen to stay home because you wanted to be taken care of, that you were lazy or unmotivated. And I believed him because I was a kid and he was my dad. My heart broke hearing that, but I also understood this wasn't really about what Marcus thought of me. This was about what David had taught him about women, about sacrifice, about the value of different types of work. Your father was wrong, I said simply, and I want you to know that. I want you to know the truth about who I was, who I am, and why I made the choices I made. What do you want me to do? Marcus asked. Do you want me to confront Dad? Do you want me to tell Amber? No, I said. What I want is for you to let this change how you see the world. When you become a father, I want you to understand the magnitude of that responsibility. I want you to recognize sacrifice in all its forms, and I want you to never, ever measure love in dollars. Marcus and Amber got married 3 months later. At the reception, Marcus gave a toast. He talked about how much his mother meant to him. He publicly apologized for what he'd said at the engagement party. And then, and this is the part that made me cry, he announced that he was starting a college fund for children in foster care. in honor of his mother's sacrifice. "My mom gave up her career to raise me," he said, looking directly at me. "She sacrificed millions of dollars so that I could have stability and love. Not every child has that, so I'm going to make sure that some of them do." Amber looked at him with such pride. His new wife understood now, because Marcus had told her the whole story. After the wedding, my relationship with Marcus fundamentally changed. We started having real conversations. He asked me about my career, my dreams, the things I'd given up. He wanted to understand his mother as a complete human being, not just as someone who was there to take care of him. He's still privileged. He still has access to his father's money and his own success. But he's aware of it now. He's thoughtful about it. He recognizes that not everyone starts where he started. A year after the wedding, Marcus asked if I'd be willing to go back to working part-time. "I want you to write a book," he said, "about your career, about leaving the workforce, about coming back. I think you have a story that a lot of people need to hear. And I want to support that financially, not as an obligation, but because I believe in you." I wrote that book. It became a bestseller in its category. And while the book made me money, the real value wasn't financial. It was the fact that my son finally saw me. Looking back on those months, the anger, the spreadsheet, the moment I almost sent that bill, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could have weaponized my sacrifice, made Marcus feel guilty, and damaged our relationship irreparably. Or I could have chosen the harder path, the path of vulnerability, honesty, and trusting that my son could grow and change. I chose the second path. That spreadsheet taught me something important. It wasn't about the money. It was about making the invisible visible. It was about saying, "This mattered. What I did matters, and I want to be seen for it." But being seen doesn't require punishment. It requires honesty. Marcus isn't perfect. He still has privileged blind spots. He still sometimes thinks about the world in financial terms because that's what he was taught. But now, when I gently correct him, he listens. He asks questions. He wants to understand. And I'm proud of him for that. The spreadsheet is framed on my desk, not as a reminder of what Marcus owes me, but as a reminder of the magnitude of love. Every line item represents a moment when I chose my child over myself. Every number represents a value that can't really be measured in dollars. I'm 62 years old now. I'm successful in my career. I'm healthy, happy, and at peace with my choices. My son respects me. My daughter-in-law tells me I'm her role model. And my relationship with Marcus is deeper and more authentic than it's ever been. He never called me a gold digger again. But more importantly, I made sure he understood why that accusation cut so deep, not because it threatened my dignity, but because it suggested that the most important thing I'd ever done was motivated by greed instead of love. That's what I needed him to understand. And finally, he did. Like this video if it touched something in you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about what it means to be human, to be family, and to choose love even when it's complicated. I'll see you next time.